The endless void of space stretched in perfect silence, unmarked by the chaos that had once defined galactic civilization. For 3,000 years, not a single shot had been fired in anger, not a single world had known hunger, not a single being had experienced the pain of loss, or the wild joy of unexpected discovery. This was the gift of the Kethmori collectives, the great stillness they called Velthera. Commander Nalkith drifted in his observation chamber, his massive form suspended in biofluid that kept his ancient body alive. Countless tentacles, each thinner than human hair, connected his nervous system to sensors that watched over half the galaxy. His species had evolved beyond the need for planets or gravity. They existed in the spaces between worlds, eternal guardians of cosmic order. The chamber hummed with the sound of 1 billion data streams. Every star's energy output was monitored and regulated. Every planet's orbit was tracked to the smallest decimal. Every civilization reported their status according to schedules established millennia ago. This was how peace was maintained through perfect knowledge and absolute control. But today, something was wrong. Nalkith's sensory organs, structures that could detect a single atom's movement across light years of space, focused on an anomaly that made no sense. The readings came from the outer rim of the galaxy, from a region so insignificant that most beings had never heard its name. Commander spoke his aide, Hex. Her crystalline body chimed like distant bells as she moved, light refracting through her transparent form in patterns that indicated deep confusion. The readings from Sector 7749 continued to disturb our calculations. Hexora had served the observation course for over 2,000 years. In all that time, she had never encountered data that refused to fit their mathematical models of civilized behavior. Her crystalline matrix, designed to process and categorize all forms of galactic activity, sparked with error patterns whenever she examined this particular system. "Show me," Nalkith commanded, his voice resonating through the biofluid. The chamber filled with holographic displays, showing a small yellow star orbited by several rocky planets. On the third Planetia world, the locals called Earth, a species that defied every principle of advanced civilization. "They call themselves humans," Hexora reported, her bell-like voice carrying tones of bewilderment. "Their behavior patterns are completely illogical." Nalkith watched the data streams with growing amazement. These humans built great cities, then tore them down in wars that served no purpose. They created beautiful art that had no practical function. They formed deep emotional bonds with single individuals rather than maintaining healthy detachment from their species as a whole. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to choose difficulty over ease at every opportunity. "Look at this," Hexara continued, highlighting a section of data. "They have developed technology that could provide unlimited clean energy, yet they continue to burn fossil fuels that poison their own atmosphere. When the poisoning becomes severe, they frantically try to repair the damage they caused." The images showed humans engaging in behaviors that violated every law of logical survival. They risked their lives to save complete strangers. They created music and literature that served no survival function. They explored dangerous places simply to satisfy what they called curiosity. Here, Hexora indicated another data stream. They have discovered that their sun will eventually destroy their world. Instead of accepting this natural cycle, they are developing plans to travel to other stars. They speak of spreading their species across the galaxy, even though they cannot even achieve peace on their own planet. Nalkith's ancient mind struggled to process what he observed. In his centuries of watching over galactic civilization, he had seen thousands of species evolve from chaos to order. Every successful civilization eventually embraced the principles of the collective motional regulation, resource optimization, conflict elimination, and peaceful stagnation. But these humans seemed to be evolving in the opposite direction. Their population grew more diverse, not more unified. Their technology became more varied and unpredictable, not more standardized. Their art became more experimental and emotional, not more rational and purposeful. Most troubling of all, they appeared to be happy with their chaotic existence. They have a concept they call freedom, Hexara continued, her crystalline form flickering with confusion patterns. They value it more than safety, more than comfort, even more than life itself. I cannot calculate the survival advantage this provides, Nelkith observed. Scenes of humans choosing dangerous professions, creating art that challenged social norms, and forming governments that allowed citizens to disagree with their leaders. By every measure, the collective used to evaluate civilization, humanity should have destroyed itself long ago. Instead, they thrived. Dispatch an observation team to this system, Nelkith finally ordered. We must understand how this species maintains stability while embracing chaos. As Hexara transmitted the command across galactic communication networks. Neither being realized they had just made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. They believed they were simply gathering data about an unusual species. What they did not understand was that chaos, like order, could spread from world to world, from mind to mind, from dream to dream. Some anomalies, once observed, become impossible to contain. The warning lights in the control room flashed red as Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-won crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel for the third time that day. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she worked on the life support system that kept her crew of 12 alive in the cold emptiness of space. Their ship, the Kiansa, had been humanity's pride 3 days ago when they left Mars. Now it was little more than a metal coffin drifting between Jupiter and Saturn. The engine had exploded without warning, leaving them stranded millions of miles from home with no way to call for help. "How are we doing down there, Minho?" Ji-won called through the ship's communication system. Engineer Kim Minho's voice crackled back from the engine room. "The hull crack in Section C is still sealed, but I'm using whatever I can find to keep it that way. We're down to using spare clothing and prayer to hold this ship together." From her pilot's seat, Lee So-min let out a tired laugh. "Well, at least prayer is free, and we have plenty of it." Ji-won smiled despite their terrible situation. This was what she loved about her crew. Even facing death in the emptiness of space, they could still find reasons to laugh. It was very human of them. That was when something impossible happened. The space around their ship began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Reality seemed to bend and twist until suddenly a massive vessel appeared beside them. The alien ship was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Its surface was smooth, like liquid metal, with curves that seemed to hurt the eyes when you looked at them directly. The crew stared in shocked silence until their communicating system came to life. The voice that spoke was calm and spoke perfect. "Korean human vessel Kiansa, this is the research ship, Velthamus, of the Kethmori Collective. We have detected your distress. We offer assistance." Kyuan felt her heart racing. First contact with alien life was something every space explorer dreamed about, but she had never imagined it would happen like this, with her ship falling apart around them. "This is Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-won," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We accept your help." 2 hours later, Ji-won found herself in a room that seemed to be made of living light. The walls glowed softly and changed color as she moved. Sitting across from her was the most unusual being she had ever seen. Ambassador Veltar looked like water that had learned to think. His body flowed and shifted constantly, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes becoming almost transparent. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Your species is very interesting to us," Veltar said, his liquid form rippling with what might have been curiosity. "We observed your crew's behavior when your ship was failing. You were in great danger, possibly facing death, yet you laughed. This is confusing to us." Double quotes. Ji-won shrugged. "What else could we do? Being scared doesn't fix broken engines. In our civilization, such dangerous situations do not exist," Veltar explained. "We have removed uncertainty, from our lives. Every ship has backup systems for the backup systems. Every journey is planned to the smallest detail. Failure is not possible. Another alien moved closer to their conversation. Dr. Zixara looked like a walking galaxy, her body filled with tiny stars that twinkled as she moved. When she spoke, her voice sounded like distant music. "We have studied your human culture," she said. "You create art and music that serve no purpose for survival. You spend time and resources on these things instead of focusing on more important needs. Why do you do this?" A third alien joined them. Engineer Tokmal was mostly machine now, with metal parts covering what had once been his original body. His voice buzzed with electronic tones. "Your species fights wars among yourselves," he said. "You kill each other over ideas and resources, but then immediately after these conflicts, you help your former enemies rebuild. You send food and medicine to people who were shooting at you the day before. This makes no logical sense." Q1 looked around at these three beings, who seemed to have achieved perfection. They were beautiful, advanced, and clearly very intelligent. They had eliminated all the problems that made human life so difficult and dangerous. But something about them made her feel sad. "We have created a perfect galaxy," Veltar continued. "There is no hunger anywhere in our space. No wars have been fought for thousands of years. No one suffers from disease or old age. We can share this perfection with humanity. You could join our collective and know true peace." The room fell silent as Jiwan considered these words. Perfect peace. No more war. No more suffering. No more fear. No more struggle. No more growth. No more surprises. "That's not life," she said quietly. "That's just existing. You've made yourselves safe, but you've also made yourselves empty. We humans would rather burn bright for a short time than slowly fade away over thousands of years." Something strange happened when she said those words. Veltar's liquid form stopped moving for a moment, as if something deep inside him had been touched. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time was beginning to wake up. Dr. Zixara held the small crystal in her hands, watching the tiny lights dance inside it, like captured stars. The crystal contained something that should not exist in the perfect galaxy of the collective human music, human art, human stories that served no logical purpose. Her body, which normally glowed with steady, controlled light, began pulsing with strange new patterns. The lights under her skin flickered in ways she had not experienced for hundreds of years. Her people had a word for this feeling once, before they joined the collective and learned to be perfect. The humans called it curiosity. "You should destroy," that engineer Tokmal warned from across the laboratory. Half of his body was now machine parts, metal and wires that had replaced his original flesh over the centuries. But even his cybernetic implants seemed to be working differently lately, analyzing human engineering designs when they should have been focused on approved research. "The collective has banned all unauthorized study of human materials," he continued, but his voice carried no conviction. His own mechanical parts were quietly recording everything they saw, storing human blueprints that showed impossible creativity. Zixara looked at her old friend and colleague. "Since when do we question what the collective tells us?" she asked. But as the words left her mouth, she realized that questioning was exactly what she was doing now. The crystal in her hands pulsed brighter, and she heard a human song about love and loss and the beauty of imperfection. Something deep inside her, something she thought had died long ago, stirred to life. Across the galaxy, similar awakenings were happening on thousands of worlds. On Kathmori Prime, the capital world of the collective, a young citizen named Rexith stood in the Great Museum of Eternal Art. He stared at paintings that had not changed in over 1,000 years. Perfect, beautiful, and completely predictable. For the first time in his life, he wondered why no one had created anything new. "Why is all our art the same?" he asked his companion, an older being who had served as museum guide for 3 centuries. The guide stopped walking, confusion spreading across his ancient features. "Because it is perfect," he replied automatically. "Perfect art does not need to change." But Rexith was no longer listening. He was imagining what new art might look like on the crystal worlds of Hexmar. Beings made of living glass began creating light patterns that had never existed before. These patterns served no function except beauty, violating every principle of efficient resource use. The patterns were chaotic, unpredictable, and somehow wonderful. In the vast fungal networks of Sporthok, where millions of mushroom-like beings shared a collective consciousness, individuals began separating themselves from the group mind. They started creating what humans called poetry words, arranged in patterns that expressed feelings rather than information. Ambassador Veltar returned to his home vessel to find his crew in a state that could only be described as chaos. Not the destructive chaos of war or disaster, but something far more dangerous to the collective's perfect order, the chaos of choice. His navigation officer was listening to human music instead of monitoring their course. His science team was discussing human philosophy instead of conducting approved research. Even his security chief was reading human literature about heroes who chose to sacrifice themselves for others. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving unauthorized transmissions from 17 different worlds. They're all requesting more information about human culture." Veltar felt his liquid form ripple with an emotion he had not experienced in millennia. It might have been excitement. Director Nalkith detected these changes from his observation chamber and immediately reported to the High Council. His tentacles writhed with agitation as he transmitted data showing the spread of what he could only call an infection. 17 worlds show signs of individualism, he reported. Citizens are creating unauthorized art, asking forbidden questions, and making choices based on emotion rather than logic. The human influence is spreading faster than our containment protocols can handle. High Counselor Zervac had not spoken directly to another being in over 2,000 years. His consciousness had merged with the planet's core systems, becoming one with the computer networks that managed galactic civilization. When he spoke now, his voice emerged from crystalline formations throughout the council chamber. "Then we eliminate the source," the voice rumbled through the crystals. "Humanity must be removed before they destroy everything we have built." But it was already too late. On distant worlds, beings who had forgotten how to dream were remembering. They listened to human music that was raw and emotional and imperfect and alive. They watched human movies showing people who chose love over safety, sacrifice over survival, hope over certainty. On the ice world of Frystal, a young being named Crystal carved her first original sculpture, breaking collective law by creating something that had never existed before. On the gas giant platforms of Vordak, engineers began designing ships meant for exploration and discovery rather than simple transportation. Captain Jang Hyok of the human exploration vessel, Tygok, was monitoring deep space communications when he received a message that changed everything. It came from Ambassador Veltar, but he was no longer speaking for the collective. "Your Lieutenant Commander Park taught us something our civilization forgot," the message began. "She showed us that existence without choice is not life. We want to learn what she meant when she said humans prefer to burn bright. How do we remember how to live instead of just existing?" The message was signed not just by Veltar, but by representatives from dozens of worlds, who had chosen to risk everything for the chance to feel truly alive. Again, the collective's war fleet was a sight that should have filled any enemy with terror. 10,000 ships moved through space in perfect formation, each one designed for a single purpose: to destroy humanity before their dangerous ideas could spread any further. The ships were beautiful in their deadly efficiency, gleaming metal giants that had never known defeat. The fleet's commanders had spent months planning this attack. Every possible human response had been calculated, Every weapon system had been tested. Every crew member had been programmed with exact instructions. There could be no failure, no surprises, no chaos to disrupt their perfect plan. But as the massive armada approached Earth's solar system, something impossible happened. The ships began to stop. Not because of enemy fire or mechanical failure, but because their crews were making a choice that violated everything the collective stood for. Ship after ship broke away from the attack formation, their crews deciding they would rather join the humans than destroy them. Captain Jang Hyok stood on the command bridge of Earth's newest warship, the Sejong, watching this miracle unfold on his screens. As a military officer, he had prepared for battle. He had not prepared for the enemy to surrender before the fighting even began. "Give me a status report," he ordered his crew, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Communications." Officer Omeron looked up from her station with amazement in her voice. "Sir, we're receiving surrender messages from over 700 collective vessels. Another 300 ships are asking if they can request asylum on Earth." Navigator Yoon Seonho checked his instruments twice before reporting what seemed impossible. "The Andromedan ships are playing human music on every frequency they have. The crystal ships from the Hexmar system are creating light displays that, well sir, they're absolutely beautiful, as if summoned by their conversation." The main communication screen flickered to life, showing the image of Ambassador Vel, but the alien being looked completely different from when they had first met. His liquid form moved with new energy, flowing in patterns that seemed almost like dancing. "Captain Zhang Veltar said," and his voice carried emotions that had been absent for thousands of years. "The war is not proceeding as the High Council planned. They ordered us to fight and destroy. Instead, we are learning to live." Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-won, who now served as Earth's primary contact with the growing alien resistance, smiled as she watched her old friend's transformation. "What's happening out there, Veltar?" "Revolution," the ambassador replied simply. "On Sporthok, the fungal beings who shared one mind for millennia are becoming individuals. Each one is writing poetry about their personal dreams. On Nebulon, the gas cloud people are using stellar matter to paint pictures in space, turning their entire star system into art. Across the galaxy, the rebellion was spreading faster than anyone had imagined possible. Beings who had lived in perfect obedience for thousands of years were suddenly remembering what it meant to make their own choices. Admiral Cho Seung-woo, Earth's supreme military commander, found himself dealing with the strangest war in human history. Instead of fighting an enemy, he was welcoming former enemies who wanted to join the human cause. "They're not fighting against us," he reported to the Earth Council during an emergency meeting. "They're fighting for the right to become themselves." Every day more ships abandoned the collective fleet to join our side. The rebellion was not fought with weapons or armies, but with ideas and dreams and the simple human belief that life should be lived fully, even if that meant accepting danger and uncertainty. Every human song broadcast into space became a weapon against the collective's control. Every movie showing people who chose love over safety inspired alien beings to make their own brave choices. Every story about humans who sacrificed themselves for others taught the galaxy what it meant to care about something more than personal survival. But the High Council of the Collective was not prepared to surrender. If they could not eliminate humanity, they would try something even more desperate. They would eliminate the very possibility of choice from the galaxy itself. Deep in the galactic core, where the original masters of the collective had merged their consciousness with the central star itself, ancient powers began to stir. These beings had not moved or spoken in thousands of years. They existed in perfect stillness, their minds controlling every aspect of galactic civilization from their stellar prison. Now they prepared to use their ultimate weapon, not to destroy human bodies, but to destroy human influence. They would reset every mind in the galaxy, removing the capacity for individual thought and returning every being to perfect mindless obedience. Director Nelkith transmitted the final orders from his observation chamber. All remaining loyal forces are to retreat to the galactic core. The Ancient Ones will handle this infection themselves. As the message spread through space, the few remaining collective ships began their withdrawal. But they were not retreating. In defeat, they were preparing for the real war, a battle, not for territory or resources, but for the right of every thinking being in the galaxy to have thoughts of their own. The ancient masters at the galaxy's heart began to wake from their eternal sleep, preparing to restore the perfect stillness that humanity had dared to disturb. The final battle was about to begin, and it would determine whether the galaxy would continue to dream or return to the endless sleep of perfection. The center of the galaxy was a place where no living being should be able to survive. Here, in the heart of everything, the original masters of the collective had done something that was both magnificent and horrible. They had given up their physical bodies and merged their minds with the central star itself, becoming one with the nuclear fire that had controlled galactic civilization for 3,000 years. Captain Jang Hyok led the combined fleet of human ships and awakened alien vessels toward this dangerous place. On the bridge beside him, Ambassador Veltar looked completely different from the being they had first met. His liquid form now moved with energy and life, creating patterns that seemed to dance with dreams and hope. The Ancient Ones have not spoken to anyone in over 1,000 years, Veltar explained as they approached the galactic core. They exist in perfect thought, controlling every star in the galaxy from inside their stellar prison. Engineer Kim Minho studied the readings from the massive star ahead of them. What he saw made no sense according to everything humans knew about physics and astronomy. It's not just a star anymore, he reported with amazement in his voice. It's a giant computer, a living mind, and a weapon all combined into one thing. Admiral Park Ji-won, who had been promoted to lead all the resistance forces, understood what they were facing. The Ancient Ones would not simply destroy them with weapons or armies. They had something much worse planned. They're going to reset the galaxy, she told her crew. They'll force every world back into the great stillness, making everyone forget how to think for themselves. As their ships moved closer to the galactic core, space itself began to change around them. The stars they passed grew dimmer, their light becoming steady and controlled, instead of the natural flickering that made each star unique. Planets slowed in their orbits, returning to the perfect, predictable paths the collective preferred. On millions of worlds across the galaxy, the awakened beings who had learned to dream and create and choose for themselves began to fall silent. The Ancient One's power was spreading outward from the galactic core like a wave, washing away individuality and replacing it with empty perfection. We're losing contact with our allies, reported Communications Officer Omaran, her voice filled with worry. The Andromedans have stopped broadcasting. The crystal beings from Hexmar are going dark. One by one, they're falling back under collective control. Giwan looked around at her crew humans, who had never known perfect peace, who had grown up with chaos and choice and the wonderful, terrible freedom to make their own mistakes. Take us into the star, she ordered. The Sajong dove into the stellar atmosphere of the core star, its human-designed shields somehow holding against nuclear forces that should have destroyed them instantly. The ship pushed deeper and deeper into the burning heart of the galaxy until they reached a place where physics stopped making sense and consciousness itself became visible. There, swimming in the nuclear fire like ancient whales in an ocean of light, were the Ancient Ones. They had once been living beings with bodies and dreams, but now they existed as pure energy, their minds merged with the star's power. You bring chaos to our perfect order, the Ancient Ones spoke, their voices carried by solar wind and radiation. We offer you perfection in return. Perfection isn't life, Jiwon replied, her voice somehow carrying across the impossible distances within the star. You've turned yourselves into ghosts. You exist, but you don't live. The Ancient Ones pulsed with anger, sending waves of energy that should have destroyed the human ship. But instead of fighting back with weapons, Ji-won did something unexpected. She began to sing. It was a simple Korean folk song her grandmother had taught her when she was a child, about sailors who were lost at sea and used the stars to find their way home. The melody was not perfect or polished. Her voice cracked on the high notes, and the words spoke of longing and hope and the pain of being far from home. Her crew joined in, their voices mixing together in imperfect harmony. Engineer Kim Min-ho sang off-key. Navigator Yoon Seon-ho forgot some of the words. Communications Officer Oh Maran hummed along because she didn't know the language. It was messy and chaotic and completely human. The Ancient Ones recoiled as if the song physically hurt them. They had not heard music in 3,000 years, having forgotten what it was like to express emotion through sound. Ambassador Veltar added his voice to the song, creating harmonics that no human throat could produce. Across the galaxy, despite the Ancient One's power, awakened beings began to sing as well. Each species sang in their own way, creating a galactic chorus that was imperfect and beautiful and alive. The stellar core began to pulse irregularly as the Ancient One's perfect control started to weaken. For the first time in millennia, the star's nuclear fire burned with natural, chaotic rhythms. Choose, Gaiwan called out to the Ancient Ones. You don't have to pick between perfect order and total chaos. Choose life. Choose to live again instead of just existing. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the galaxy held its breath. The Ancient Ones floated in their stellar prison, feeling emotions they had not experienced in thousands of years. Fear, hope, curiosity, the terrifying joy of not knowing what would happen next. Then they chose life. The core star blazed with new fire as ancient consciousness awakened to sensation and possibility. Across the galaxy, billions of suns began to burn brighter and more naturally. Worlds spun with renewed energy. Species that had slept in perfect order opened their eyes to an imperfect universe full of wonder and surprise. 6 months later, Admiral Park Ji-won stood on the observation deck of a new space station orbiting Earth. Every day, alien ships arrived carrying beings who had traveled across the galaxy seeking something more precious than technology or resources. They came looking for teachers who could show them how to dream, how to love, how to fail, and try again. The galaxy had learned to burn bright, and in the darkness between the stars, new suns were being born.